Welcome to the secret world of finance. Today we're looking into a topic that's, well, really shaken things up globally. Donald Trump's recent tariff policies. We've got a stack of source materials here, and our goal is to unpack all the complexities, get past the headlines, and really show you the real-world effects of these economic moves.
Exactly. And we'll be covering, the immediate impacts businesses, families, but also the human costs and the ripples globally, the thinking behind it, the controversy. It's a lot. High stakes, definitely a lot of uncertainty out there. We'll try to break it down.
Okay, so let's start with the philosophy, maybe. Donald Trump, he's had this fondness for tariffs for decades, hasn't he? Famously called them a beautiful word, even music to my ears. How did that translate into actual policy this time around, especially on what he called Liberation Day?
Right. Liberation Day, April 2nd, 2025. That was the big rollout. And the scale was just huge. We're talking over 50 new or revised policies hitting more than 180 countries. Rates jumped, anywhere from 10% up to 50%. And China, they got hit with a massive 145% tariff, just staggering. His reasons, publicly stated anyway, were things like making America rich again, bringing back industry, American industry reborn, he said, and stopping foreign cheaters who he claimed were damaging U.S. factories. But critically, he did this by declaring the trade deficit a national emergency. That let him bypass Congress, a very big move.
Bypassing Congress.
Yeah.
Wow. So what was the immediate reaction then? Did the market see it as liberation?
Not quite. Not at all, actually. The reaction was pretty much immediate shock. We saw panic selling in the bond market. Stocks slumped quite significantly, and the risk of a global recession. It shot way up. Reuters did a poll, I think, and something like 60% of economists saw a high chance of a global downturn in 2025 because of this. So no, the financial world was definitely not cheering.
Okay, so that initial shock, the fallout, seemed almost instantaneous. And this is where it gets really interesting, right? The bond market reaction sounds like it was key. You mentioned sources describing it as the safest asset in the U.S. heading to a fire sale, pushing the economy to the edge of a cliff.
Absolutely critical. That kind of language, edge of a cliff, that serious talk from financial experts. It sent jitters everywhere. And it connects to the internal dynamics within the administration. People sometimes call it a royal court. Decisions often come from a close circle, interpreting what the president wants rather than maybe traditional channels. This seems to be how Peter Navarro, who is a big proponent, a real radical protectionist, and key in designing the tariffs, how he got sidelined. Because with the bond market in panic mode, Howard Lutnick, the Commerce Secretary, and Scott Bessent at Treasury, they basically staged an intervention, went to Trump, unannounced, unscheduled, and convinced him they had to pause the reciprocal tariffs.
An unscheduled intervention. Wow. And then the administration tries to spin it, right? The classic art of the deal framing. But Navarro, the guy who pushed for it, he was reportedly blindsided, shocked by the U-turn.
That's what the report suggests, yeah. Shocked. So you have to ask, what really forced that pause? Was it the farmers struggling, the truckers we'll talk about, their voices?
Yeah, what was the real trigger?
Well, their stories are definitely part of the pressure, no doubt. But the reporting suggests the immediate trigger for that specific pause wasn't them. It was raw panic on Wall Street. And direct warnings from the CEOs of huge retailers, think Walmart, Target. They apparently got into the Oval Office and said point blank, we're going to have empty shelves if you cut off China trade like this. That direct threat to consumer supply chains, that seems to be what really forced the backtrack.
Empty shelves. That's a powerful image. So, okay, some reciprocal tariffs were paused, but others still went ahead.
Oh, absolutely. The pause wasn't total. For example, that 50% tariff on copper, that went into effect July 8th, and there was still the threat of a huge 200% tariff on pharmaceutical imports. Though, interestingly, they gave a long grace period for that one, like a year and a half, sort of nudging companies, hey, maybe move your operations back here.
Let's dig into that impact more on actual American businesses, workers. You mentioned Molson Hart, the toy maker.
Yeah, Molson Hart in Texas. His story is pretty stark. That 145% tariff on Chinese imports, it just stopped his production. Dead halt. He had runs planned, ready to go, couldn't do them. Now he's scrambling, trying to move production to Southeast Asia. But that takes, 6 months, maybe a year. Sometimes it's just not possible. And the U.S. Toy Association is worried. They're talking price hikes, shortages, even bankruptcies. Something like 80% of U.S. toys come from China. So
yeah,
it's a huge disruption.
80%.
Whoa.
And not just toys, right? Dan Turner's hydraulics company.
Right. Dan Turner. Similar story, different sector. He ordered a component from China, cost about $48,000. While it was literally on the water, the new tariffs hit. Suddenly, that $48,000 part costs him closer to $130,000. That's because of the new 145% plus an old 25% tariff from 2018, so like a 170% hit. He's had to stop all future orders from China. Too uncertain. How can you plan a business like that?
You can't. And agriculture, too.
Yeah.
John Ash, the soybean farmer.
Yeah, John Ash in North Carolina, he told reporters he had to cut his soybean planting in half. 50%. Just too much price uncertainty because of the tariffs. And his big fear that China finds other suppliers like Brazil and those become permanent relationships. American farmers get left out. He sounded really frustrated, saying things change between lunch and dinner. Impossible to plan.
And the truckers, like Mark Neves, that really brings the human cost home.
It really does. A third-generation trucker, Mark Neves, his work just dried up. Ports had thousands of empty containers sitting there, no goods moving, so no work for him. He was down to working maybe 1 or 2 days a week, trying to make ends meet. And what's really striking is the reported Trump response to truckers' problems. Basically, good, China's not stealing from us.
Yeah.
While these guys are struggling. Mark's point was powerful. This isn't just about China, it's hurting us.
And these aren't just isolated stories. What's the bigger economic picture from experts?
Well, the general consensus among economists seems to be pretty clear. These kinds of tariffs tend to create more losers than winners. The argument is they lead to a loss of capital, which means eventually a loss of jobs. Some economists were predicting manufacturing jobs could fall 5, even 10%. And we saw, 8,000 manufacturing jobs lost just in May?
And there's this idea that tariffs act like a hidden tax, hitting some harder than others.
Yeah, this is really key. Economists often call tariffs a regressive tax, meaning they hit lower-income households hardest as a percentage of their income. Yale University did a study projecting it could cost families anywhere from like $1,200 to almost $5,000 a year extra. And for the lowest income households, that could be like a 4% cut in their after-tax income. That's significant.
You really see it in prices. Major appliances up 4.3% in a month, toys up 2.2%. They're projecting apparel could jump 17%. And new homes, an average increase of $9,200 attributed to tariffs on materials. That hits affordability hard.
And it's not always logical in terms of protecting U.S. industry. You mentioned coffee earlier. Right, coffee, a 10% tariff. The U.S. is the biggest importer, but we don't really grow coffee here to protect. Same with bananas, 10% tariff. Walmart apparently already raised banana prices by 8%. It just feels like a direct hit on consumers for some items.
Okay, let's zoom out. What about the global picture? How did this ripple effect play out internationally?
Globally, the impact was pretty significant. Estimates suggest a contraction in global trade of maybe 1.5 to 2%, and a hit to global GDP of around 1%. That's huge. Companies started reporting supply chain chaos again, levels they hadn't seen since the pandemic. Lots of volatility.
And we're seeing these big structural shifts, right? The bullwhip effect in supply chains and this idea of friendshoring.
Exactly. The bullwhip effect, small changes in consumer demand get amplified way up the supply chain, causing massive inventory swings, very disruptive. And friendshoring, yeah. That's companies trying to move production out of places seen as risky, like China, and into countries considered politically safer or aligned. But that's a massive, expensive, multi-year process. It creates huge inefficiencies in the meantime.
And the impact wasn't the same everywhere, was it?
No, definitely varied. Canada and Mexico got hit with 25% on some things. The EU initially saw 20%, then got dialed back to 10% during that pause. Germany was seen as particularly vulnerable there. Australia seemed to weather it a bit better, facing a general 10%, but able to pivot more easily to Asian markets.
And then there were those specific ultimatum letters sent out.
Right, to 14 countries, basically non-negotiable demands. Tariffs threatened from 25% up to 40%. Like Japan and South Korea were looking at 25%. Laos, Myanmar facing 40%, all with an August 1 deadline. Interestingly, India wasn't on that list. Separate talks were apparently ongoing there, so very targeted pressure.
And throughout all this, what's China's position? They have their own plans, right?
Oh, absolutely. China has its Made in China 2025 strategy. They're aiming for global leadership in key tech sectors, EVs, batteries, chips, AI, you name it. Plus, they control a lot of critical resources like rare earths. And they've shown they can retaliate strategically using what some call precision-guided economic munitions, especially when the U.S. restricts tech sales to them. They're not just passively taking hits.
It sounds like it sets up a really dangerous dynamic, a choking contest, as some sources put it.
That's the fear. A direct economic confrontation between the U.S. and China. And, frankly, China's political system, being authoritarian, might give them an edge in mobilizing resources and absorbing economic pain in the short term. Maybe more than a democracy can. They have more centralized control.
And this trade friction, it's spilling over into geopolitics.
It seems to be, yeah. We're seeing shifts. Some South American countries, for instance, starting to see China as maybe a more reliable partner now. The BRICS nations, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, and others, are cooperating more closely. It all points towards a more fragmented, multipolar global trade system. And historically, those can be less stable. It definitely increases friction, raises the risk of wider conflict. Some analysts even worry about it escalating towards, well, actual conflict over trade, maybe even related to Taiwan. The economic tensions are definitely fueling geopolitical ones.
And there are fundamental questions about whether the core premise of the policy is even correct, economically speaking.
Right. You have economists like David K. Johnston basically saying the idea that the exporting country pays the tariff is just wrong, flat out wrong. Standard economics says the cost is borne by the consumers in the importing country. Johnston called Trump's view on this appallingly ignorant. It's a core disagreement on how tariffs actually work.
Plus the whole constitutional angle. Congress is supposed to control tariffs, not the president acting alone through emergency powers.
Exactly. It's a major separation of powers issue. The courts have been kind of slow to weigh in directly on these trade actions, but well, the broader trend with the Supreme Court maybe favoring presidential power in some areas is something people are watching very closely. It could reshape things.
And what about the motivations behind it all? Some critics have a pretty cynical take.
Yeah, some argue Trump operates from a worldview where everybody is cheating the U.S. And the source you mentioned posits this comes from his own business background, suggesting he believes this because he has, quote, spent his entire life cheating other people. That's a harsh critique, but it speaks to the transactional, zero-sum view some see in these policies.
In this transactional approach, does it open the door to, well, potential corruption? You mentioned Vietnam.
That Vietnam example is definitely raising eyebrows. So Vietnam gets hit with a big 46% tariff. Then, shortly after, the prime minister there hosts Eric Trump, and they announce this huge $1.5 billion luxury development project involving the Trump Organization. Reports suggest the project got sped up after presidential intervention. It looks like potential influence peddling, tying policy to personal business.
And there's that club in Georgetown, too.
Yeah.
The Executive Branch Club.
Yeah, that's another one. An invitation-only club. Reports say business leaders pay $500,000 to join, giving them private access to meet administration officials. Democrats have called it things like flagrant oligarchical behavior, grossly illegal. It definitely creates a perception of pay-to-play access.
So pulling it all together, is there a grand strategy? Is it four-dimensional chess, or is it more chaotic?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Views are split. Some supporters see a master plan unfolding. Critics point to things like apparently imposing tariffs on a country described internally as just an island with penguins, and they argue that suggests maybe it's not deeply thought out. More reactive, maybe it leaves businesses, allies, everyone in this state of constant uncertainty, just trying to guess what comes next.
And that uncertainty itself is damaging for businesses trying to plan.
Hugely damaging. As one business owner put it, this could last maybe another 3.5 years. Imagine trying to make investment decisions, manage supply chains with that kind of cloud hanging over you.
Well, we certainly covered a lot of ground. It's clear these tariff policies under Donald Trump have caused massive disruption from kitchen tables here right up to global supply chains and really changing international dynamics.
Absolutely. And the key takeaway might be that these aren't just temporary shocks. We're likely seeing the start of permanent structural changes, shifts in who trades with whom, how supply chains are built, the whole geopolitical map. This could be reshaping the global economic order for a long time.
So as the world continues to navigate this era of, well, heightened trade protectionism, it leaves us with some big questions. What does this mean long-term for global prosperity, for stability? What kind of economic future is actually being built right now? Thank you for listening. See you again in the next episode.